Picture the last breath leaving your body. The church promised you a doorway, eyes close, and you wake at a gate of pearl or a lake of fire, nothing in between. But the Book of Enoch, a text the apostles quoted as scripture and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church guarded for 3,000 years, describes the moment of death completely differently. It isn't a doorway, it's guarded airspace, a contested zone where entities wait, classifications are checked, and unprepared souls are seized before they ever reach God. What Western councils cut from your Bible was never comfort, it was a warning. The sky above you isn't empty space. It's a layered structure, built with precision and held in place by fixed cosmic law. But that isn't what most pulpits teach anymore. The modern 66-book Protestant Bible reflects a theological model that was stripped down during the Roman standardization of Christianity in the 4th century. In that framework, the afterlife works like a light switch. Your body dies on earth, and your eternal state, heaven or hell, snaps on instantly. No friction, no transit, no spiritual geography at all. Now walk into a 1st century gathering instead. Sit among people who studied the Greek Septuagint, who read the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, who shared the worldview of Paul and Jude. You'd hear something completely different. To them, the move from mortal life into eternity wasn't a switch being flipped. It was a dangerous journey through an organized spiritual landscape, called Sheol in Hebrew, or the Great Mountain of the West in the Enochic tradition. In chapter 22 of the Book of Enoch, the archangel Raphael takes the patriarch on a journey to a towering mountain range at the westernmost edge of the cosmos. Standing before it, Enoch notices something our simplified modern picture of death never accounts for. The mountain is hollowed into 4 separate chambers, deep, wide, and completely dark. Enoch asks why the cavities are divided from one another. Raphael's answer breaks the tidy binary of immediate heaven or hell. The 4 chambers exist to hold the spirits of every human being between physical death and the great day of judgment. This isn't purgatory. It isn't a medieval Catholic invention for selling indulgences. It's the older doctrine of the intermediate state, the same idea Peter reached for when he wrote of spirits kept in prison, and the same one John drew on when he saw the souls of the martyrs crying out from beneath the altar. Raphael lays the structure out plainly. The 4 chambers aren't identical. They're separated by divisions of light, water, and darkness, sorting souls by their legal classification at the exact moment of death. The first chamber holds a bright spring of water and light. It's reserved for the righteous elect, those who died aligned with cosmic order and spiritual truth, and they wait there in peace until the final resurrection. The second chamber holds a specific class of souls, the righteous, who were murdered or unjustly killed, who died crying out for justice. Raphael points Enoch to the spirit of Abel, the first murder victim in human history, still petitioning heaven from that chamber for judgment against the line of Cain. The third chamber is where the after-death bottleneck starts to show its teeth. It holds sinners who died prosperous, people who lived in rebellion, materialism, and compromise, but faced no consequences while they were alive. Because they escaped justice on earth, they're seized at death and bound in that dark chamber, in pain, until the final tribunal. And one of these 4 chambers is designed as a permanent, inescapable trap for souls who genuinely believed they had lived good lives. We'll get to the exact legal loophole that catches them, but first you need to understand who is actually guarding these gates. The 4th chamber might be the saddest of all. It holds souls who weren't wicked, only indifferent, lukewarm, complicit with corrupt systems, not righteous enough for the 1st chamber's light, not wicked enough for the 3rd chamber's binding. They're left in a kind of perpetual twilight, cut off from God's presence, wandering in empty space with no exit and no answer. So why did the Roman Catholic Church, at the councils of Hippo and Carthage, and later the Protestant reformers, keep this map out of ordinary believers' hands? Because an institution chasing political and financial control cannot afford a population that understands how the spirit realm actually works. If people grasp that death is an encounter with a legal sorting system, rather than something decided arbitrarily by a priest or fixed by reciting a prayer with no real change behind it, then the institution's monopoly on salvation collapses. By removing the Book of Enoch from the Western canon, religious authorities blinded generations of believers to this transit zone. They erased the map and took down the warning signs, leaving millions of departing souls unprepared for what meets them. The instant the silver cord is severed and the spirit steps into the atmospheric heavens. This wasn't an accident of history. It was a decision, made in rooms the ordinary believer was never allowed to enter by men who understood exactly what they were burying. The moment a spirit leaves the body, it doesn't float through a peaceful vacuum. It enters the atmospheric heavens, a contested zone occupied by ancient entities that have held the near-Earth spiritual realms since before the flood. The right side of the thumbnail shows how ancient Ethiopian Christianity depicted this exact moment. A narrow, precarious bridge the soul must cross, angels at the top directing the traffic of departing spirits, and horned entities below holding iron chains, reaching up to snare anyone who loses their footing. This isn't merely symbolic art. It's a visual version of the Enochic doctrine of aerial interception, an idea so widely accepted in the early church that Paul warned the Ephesians their real struggle wasn't against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, and spiritual wickedness in high places. In the heavenly realms, the Greek says more precisely, not down in some underworld, but above, in the airspace between earth and the highest heaven. So where did these entities come from, and what gives them the authority to harass and detain a departing soul? The answer sits in chapters 15 and 16 of the Book of Enoch, which preserve a piece of demonology that was cut entirely from the standard Old Testament. In chapter 15, God speaks to Enoch about the fate of the Nephilim, the hybrid offspring of the fallen watchers, and human women. When the flood drowned their physical bodies, their spirits didn't die because their fathers were immortal celestial beings. But those spirits couldn't ascend to the high heavens either, since their origin was rebellion and earthly flesh, and they couldn't descend into hell, since they carried the immortal essence of the Watchers. So God decreed that their disembodied spirits would remain trapped in the atmospheric layers and on the surface of the earth. They became the Pneumata, the unclean spirits, the wandering demons, the archons of the air. Enoch describes them roaming the earth without physical form, causing grief and deception, never eating or drinking, but hungering constantly for human energy. This is the key to understanding the trap after death. The atmospheric heaven, what biblical scholars call the first and second heavens, is thick with these disembodied entities. They act as self-appointed customs agents, patrolling the transit zone between the earthly realm and the holding chambers of Sheol. The Gnostic texts found at Nag Hammadi, which drew heavily on early Enochic Judaism, call them the archons, the rulers, the toll collectors of the air. When an unprepared soul tries to rise through the atmospheric grid, these territorial powers intercept it, not with physical weapons, but with legal accusations and energetic attachments. So how does an archon or a wandering Nephilim spirit actually trap a departing soul? By using the unresolved spiritual cargo the person carried to the grave. Someone who spends their life consumed by materialism, addiction, bitterness, or idolatry weaves dark earthly energy into their spiritual body, creating a bridge straight to the unclean spirits that rule those domains. When they die, they may fully believe they're going to heaven because they belong to a church or once repeated a religious formula. But in the spirit realm, denominational labels don't matter. Only legal resonance does. When that soul enters the contested airspace, the gatekeeping entities recognize their own property, the unresolved attachments, the unrepented compromises, the spiritual blindness carried like sediment. They cast their iron chains, bonds of spiritual law rather than physical shackles, and pull the soul off its upward path into the dark hollows of the western mountain. This is where the ancient Ethiopian manuscripts reveal their most disturbing detail. A group of entities known as the Angels of Punishment, who don't serve the fallen watchers, but operate under a divine mandate most modern Christians would flatly call heresy. None of this compares to what happens when a soul actually reaches the first gate. The institutional church spent centuries teaching that the devil runs hell as a chaotic kingdom of fire and torture. The Book of Enoch describes something far more organized. In chapters 53, 54, and 56, Enoch is shown a different class of beings, the Satans, which in ancient Hebrew isn't a proper name for one red-horned devil, but a title meaning the adversaries, the accusers. Alongside them stand the angels of punishment, severe and unyielding enforcers, described forging chains of iron and steel and wielding scourges. Institutional theology tends to skip this part entirely. These aren't fallen demons rebelling against God. They're divine executioners operating under the Lord of Spirits' own legal framework. They act as prosecutors and wardens of the intermediate state. When an indifferent or hypocritical soul tries to bypass the holding chambers and ascend straight to the high heavens, these angels step into its path, enforcing the fixed law of the cosmos. And if that soul lacks the required covering, the fixed order of the sky does not bend for it, not once. If the soul lacks righteousness and real spiritual knowledge, the angels of punishment bind it in chains of darkness and deliver it to Sheol, to wait there for the final judgment. You can start to see why the Roman Empire and the early papal councils couldn't tolerate this text circulating. It destroys the idea of passive salvation. The afterlife isn't a vote. It isn't a participation trophy. It's a legally governed reality where ignorance is no excuse, and church membership offers no protection whatsoever against the gatekeepers of the sky. So, if the atmospheric heavens are watched by Nephilim spirits hunting the unprepared, and the angels of punishment stand ready to bind anyone without the legal rite of passage, how does any spirit survive the crossing? What lets the righteous bypass the iron labyrinth and reach the illuminated chambers directly? Imagine standing at the threshold of eternity, your body cold on a hospital bed or a battlefield behind you, and realizing that the prayers, rituals, and denominational slogans you repeated for decades mean nothing to the entities standing in your path. You invoke your church, your baptismal certificate, your belief in the correct doctrines, but the gatekeepers don't respond to earthly credentials. They're scanning for one thing only, the seal of the righteous elect. In chapters 38 through 44, a section called the Book of Parables, Enoch is shown the resolution to this bottleneck. He sees the dwelling places of the holy ones under the protective wings of the Lord of Spirits, and as he watches souls navigate the contested airspace, he notices the single trait that separates those bound in Sheol from those who pass through unhindered. It isn't religion, it isn't loyalty to an institutional hierarchy, it's possession of what the texts call the garments of glory and the seal of light. In Second Temple theology, which the New Testament writers understood well, salvation wasn't merely a legal transaction settled in some distant courtroom while you stayed spiritually inert on earth. It was an active process, shedding the corrupt, heavy vibrations of this world and putting on divine light. When Paul told the Corinthians they'd be clothed with a house from heaven, so that mortality might be swallowed up by life, he was drawing directly on the Enochic framework. When Revelation describes the saints given white robes and warns believers to keep their garments spotless so they don't walk naked and ashamed, it's pointing at the same spiritual mechanics of the intermediate state. Here is how the mechanism of after-death passage actually works, without the institutional whitewashing. While you're alive, every choice and every alignment you make with the Creator's cosmic order either adds light to your spiritual vehicle or binds heavy dark weight to your soul. Nothing you do is neutral. Everything is recorded in the fabric of what you carry. Pursuing suppressed truth, rejecting the corrupt systems of Babylon, building a direct covenant relationship with God through Christ. This imprints a literal spiritual seal on your forehead and heart. In the spirit realm, that seal blazes like the sun, an unmistakable signature of divine ownership. When a soul bearing this seal exits the body and enters the atmospheric heavens, the entire dynamic shifts instantly. The disembodied Nephilim spirits, the archons who patrol the skies for unresolved attachments, cannot touch a soul clothed in the garments of glory. The moment they try to cast their chains, the seal's frequency repels them. They're legally blinded, paralyzed by the light of the elect. And when that sealed soul reaches the checkpoints run by the angels of punishment, the enforcers don't draw their chains. Recognizing the signature of the Lord of Spirits, they step aside and act as an honor guard, escorting the spirit past the dark cavities of the western mountain, past the twilight zones of the indifferent, straight into the illuminated spring of water and light, the resting place reserved for the holy ones, until the final resurrection. This is the secret the institutional church spent 16 centuries concealing. They wanted you to believe you were a helpless, passive sheep who needed their priests, their buildings, their sacraments, and their permission to navigate the afterlife. They frightened people with invented doctrines of purgatory and paid indulgences, while suppressing the older knowledge of how to build your spiritual vehicle while still on earth. The Book of Enoch wasn't banned for being superstitious. It was banned because it's a survival manual, a blueprint of the unseen world that strips away institutional control and puts responsibility for your eternal destiny back in your own hands. You aren't a physical being having a temporary spiritual experience. You're an ancient spirit encased in a vehicle of clay, living in a world manipulated by fallen cosmic powers. Your time on Earth isn't a playground. It's a brief window to gain discernment, shed the weight of this system, and secure the seal of light so you can walk through the valley of the shadow of death without stopping at the toll houses of the air. Now that you've seen the map, you can't unsee it. The sky above us isn't empty space. It's a spiritual highway, governed by fixed laws, patrolled by ancient entities testing the true weight of what you carry. The real question was never what happens when you die. It's what kind of spiritual cargo you're building right now, while your feet are still on the ground. And that connects to a mystery even larger than the architecture of the atmospheric heavens. The celestial bodies moving through those same skies every night. If the airspace above us is this guarded, why did the author of Enoch devote an entire suppressed section to the exact mechanical movements of the moon? Because in this account, the moon isn't a dead rock reflecting sunlight. It's an engineered instrument tied to the judgment of souls. Click the video on your screen, and I'll show you what it hides.